everybody, this is Tyler here once again from the Character Workshop, now offering flute lessons. So yes, I am now finally doing another episode of It Came From England talking about Doctor Who. Now, last time I talked about the first Doctor era, of course the first Doctor being played by William Hartnell. This episode I am going to be talking about the second Doctor era, with the second Doctor being played by Patrick Troughton. Now before I move on, I will make one statement. Yes, I know the last time I talked about Doctor Who on this show, I mispronounced the word serial and pronounced it as surreal for some reason. But nowadays, I know that it's pronounced cereal, and at the time I thought it was kind of weird to pronounce it cereal because I was thinking about the breakfast food cereal, but you learn from the past. But yeah, sorry for referring to cereals as surreal back then. But anyways, let's get on to what we're talking about. So as I mentioned in the First Doctor episode, the First Doctor's final episode, final serial, was the 10th Planet, which was aired between October 8th and October 29th, 1966. And at the end of the 10th Planet, the Doctor regenerates into a different looking Doctor, who would of course later become the second Doctor. Now, the first serial to feature the second Doctor after the 10th Planet was The Power of the Daleks, which was a 6-episode long serial that aired between November 5th and December 10th, 1966. As I mentioned the last time I talked about Doctor Who, Ben and Polly were the first Doctor's final two companions before he regenerated. And during the second Doctor era, Ben and Polly were the second Doctor's first two companions, and they continued to be his companions from The Power of the Daleks all the way up until The Faceless Ones. One thing that's interesting to note about Patrick Troughton's interpretation of the Doctor compared to William Hartnell's interpretation is, of course, in terms of physical appearance and personality. William Hartnell, of course, was a more older-looking Doctor in terms of his hair and his grumpy-like personality with anybody he meets. The second Doctor is not so much like that, as he has a slightly younger appearance, black moppy hair, and, of course, had more action-oriented stories and all other stuff during his era. And just like with the First Doctor era, during the Second Doctor era, the companions would often come and go like they did back in the First Doctor era. So, the serial after The Power of the Daleks, The Highlanders, introduces a new companion that would stay with the Second Doctor throughout the rest of his run, under the name Jamie McCrimmon. A couple of interesting things to note about the Highlanders serial is, first of all, Jamie himself. Now, the serial itself takes place in Scotland during the 1700s, and originally Jamie wasn't going to be a companion of the Doctor, but it was decided while in production that Jamie would be with the Doctor, Ben and Polly, so they had to refilm the end of the serial to have Jamie go alongside the Doctor, Ben and Polly. Now, as you guys might have remembered, a lot of the First Doctor serials had a couple of, stories featuring historical time periods. For example, the Aztecs, the Romans, the Mythmakers, just to name a few. And the Highlanders was the only Second Doctor story that had a historical themed story to it. Now, this was dropped after this serial because, according to Michael Troughton, who was Patrick Troughton's son, Patrick Troughton encouraged to move away from historical stories because he thought it was more interesting to explore real science in drama, and he had a desire to further distinguish himself from William Hartnell. And of course, after the Highlanders, Jamie would continue to go along with the Doctor throughout the rest of his run. And of course, during a couple of his first serials, he was also partnered up with Ben and Polly, up until The Faceless Ones, which takes place in the year 1966. Ben and Polly realized that, and they decided to get back home, leaving only the Doctor and Jamie to travel. So then in the serial after the Faceless Ones was The Evil of the Daleks, which, interestingly enough, was originally going to be the final Dalek-themed story of Doctor Who, as the writer and creator of the Daleks, Terry Nation, tried to sell the Daleks as an American TV show, but of course this didn't happen, and the Daleks, 5 years after the serial came out, would appear in the series again as regular recurring villains. Now, this serial was also the first to introduce a new companion who would replace Ben and Polly under the name Victoria Waterfield. And she would travel alongside the Doctor and Jamie throughout another couple of serials until around the end of season 5. A couple of serials go by, and then during the middle of season 5, in The Web of Fear, introduces a character who's not entirely a companion of the Doctor, but still helps him out every now and then, is a guy by the name of Alistair Lethbridge Stewart. Now, during this serial, he was known as Colonel Lethbridge Stewart, and then in later serials that he appeared in, he was known as the Brigadier, or Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart. The next serial afterwards, Fury from the Deep, would be Victoria's final episode as the Doctor's companion. And her reason for leaving is because she's been mentally and emotionally exhausted from all their adventures, especially with all the dangers that the Doctor, Jamie, and her have encountered. So she decided to leave the TARDIS crew. And while the Doctor was fine with this, Jamie, on the other hand, was heartbroken about this news. And so after this serial, the Doctor and Jamie would once again travel with just the two of them. Now, the next serial, The Wheel in Space, introduced another companion who would basically replace Victoria under the name Zoe Harriot. I'm sorry if I mispronounced her name, but she would continue to be with the Doctor and Jamie throughout the rest of the Second Doctor era. And a few more serials go by, and in the third serial of season 6, under the name The Invasion, the Doctor and Jamie once again encounter the Brigadier, Lethbridge Stewart, in order to help them against an invasion done by the Doctor's one of the Doctor's more well-known enemies, the Cybermen. Now, this is probably the point of the review where I should actually talk about the Cybermen. Now, I forgot to mention this in my previous Doctor Who episode, but the 10th Planet serial, which introduced the Cybermen, and was also William Hartnell's final serial as the Doctor. That serial was their first appearance, and in that serial, they had a much more slightly human-looking design, and their voices were a bit different. They sounded more human with a bit of a robotic tone to it. In later serials of Doctor Who, that would be shoved away for a more robotic-sounding voice. And the Cybermen have later appeared 4 times during the Troughton era, the first being the Moon Base, where in 2070, the Cybermen attempt to destroy Earth by affecting the weather patterns called the Gravitron on the Moon Base. And in Tomb of the Cybermen, the Doctor, Jamie, and Victoria traveled to the 25th century, where a human expedition was on the planet Telos. I haven't watched this serial in a while, so I do apologize if I've mispronounced it. But they went inside a cave, and they have found Cybermen hibernating in there, and they were arise back from their cold slumber and went on to attack the characters in that episode. And they also introduced the Cybermats, which were small mechanical scouts that were used by the Cybermen, and of course the Cyber Controller, the leader, I guess you can say, for the Cybermen. And then in Zoe's first appearance on Doctor Who, The Wheel in Space, the Cybermen are there once again on a marooned Earth space station in the 21st century. I honestly find it so funny that like a lot of the Cybermen themed stories of Doctor Who often take place, in the future. Like, the 10th planet took place in 1986, the moon base took place in 2070, and the Wheel in Space took place also in the 21st century in an unknown year. Tomb of the Cybermen took place in the 25th century, which honestly makes you kind of see the Cybermen as like a more futuristic alien species. However, the final appearance of the Cybermen in the black and white era and then the Troughton era in general was in the Invasion, which actually took place in the late 20th century England, which is, I guess you can kind of say, around the same time as the 10th planets, but not really so sure. But in this serial, the Cybermen are hidden on Earth working for a guy to invade the Earth with. Now that I've gotten the Cybermen out of the way, in later serials, 4 more serials after the invasion, the War Games, which was a 10-episode long serial. That's crazy. But anyways, in that one, the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe land what they thought was a war zone, but then ended up being a bit of a thing being done by an alien species to have people forced to fight each other, being based on different types of wars throughout human history. Now, these aliens that have been revealed to be causing all this mayhem are actually the same species as the Doctor, under the names the Time Lords, and the main guy being responsible for all the war madness was having a most simple name ever, but the guy was named simply the Warlord. And this whole scenario was crazy to the point where the Doctor himself was forced to contact the main Time Lords themselves. And both the Doctor and the Warlord were put on trial. While the Warlord was dematerialized, the Doctor, however, had a much more bigger punishment. First things first, the Time Lords erased Jamie and Zoe's memories of the Doctor, besides their first encounter with them. And as for the Doctor, they forced him to regenerate into a different Doctor, and they exiled him to Earth for stealing the TARDIS and breaking their rules. So that was basically the Troughton era of Doctor Who in a nutshell. And I will tell you, it was definitely, in my opinion, a lot more interesting than the Hartnell era. Now, just like the Hartnell era, I have not seen every serial from the Troughton era because, well, like with Hartnell, a good chunk of the Troughton serials are lost. Only 7 of them are available in their entirety, and those would be the Tomb of the Cybermen, the Enemy of the World, the Dominators, the Mind Robbers, the Crotons, the Seeds of Death, and the War Games. Now, another thing I've never mentioned in my Hartnell episode of Doctor Who, of It Came From England, was the fact that some of the missing serials from the show have been recreated using animation. Now, how that works, all the audio from the missing serials have survived, so they basically use that audio to then animate the recreations of the episodes based on the audio, and of course storyboards and still photographs. And seeing that nowadays, all these episodes at this point are like over 50 years old, it's almost kind of unlikely that they'll be found, which is quite a disappointment. While I personally hope they'll get found at some point, the animation recreations are probably like the closest thing we'll be seeing to those episodes. Now, the first Doctor only had 2 of his missing serials so far recreated using animation, and those 2 would be The Reign of Terror and The 10th Planet. The second Doctor had a lot more serials that have been recreated with animation, probably because he's had more missing serials and episodes than the first Doctor, and those so far would be The Power of the Daleks, The Moon Base, The Macro Terror, The Ice Warriors, and the Invasion. However, later this year, BBC did confirm that they will be doing an animation recreation of The Faceless Ones and Fury from the Deep, which is kind of funny because The Faceless Ones was Ben and Polly's final serial, and then The Fury from the Deep was Victoria's final serial. So I honestly can't wait to see these episodes being recreated and finally shown to the public in a proper way, or at least as close to being a proper way as we can get it. So chances are I'll probably be doing like reviews of those serials once they come out on DVD. And of course, any other serials that I didn't really mention too much in these reviews. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And now a couple more things I want to mention about the Troughton era before I go. First off would be the intro. Now the intro used throughout the entire Hartnell era was just a sort of a moving shape, sort of logo, not logo, the intro, and then the logo would pop up and then it will just like zoom out all the way into the background. During the second Doctor era, starting with the Macro Terror, I don't know why the first 4 serials of his didn't change this, but whatever. In the Macro Terror, they changed the intro to include a different, shape-shifting background, and then of course Troughton's face would come in afterwards, and then the Doctor Who logo would come, and just like the previous logo, the logo would just zoom back into the background. And then starting with episode 2 of The Faceless Ones, kind of a weird place to start doing this change, but while the Macro Terror already introduced the new logo, episode 2 of The Faceless Ones introduced a new theme music, which was, kind of similar to the Hartnell era intro and the early Troughton serials, but it was changed slightly to be a little bit different compared to the Hartnell era, I guess. And another thing to point out about the Troughton era is that a lot of the serials that were in that era introduced a lot of recurring monsters that would appear in later Doctor Who episodes and serials. And we already had like 4 appearances of the Cybermen as well as 2 appearances of the Daleks. And these serials also introduced other recurring monsters like the Yetis, who were first introduced in the Abominable Snowmen and the Web of Fear. And the Ice Warriors were also introduced during that era. They were in the episodes, the serials, the Ice Warriors and the Seeds of Death. And so many more would continue to be on during this era. Now, from what I've heard, the reason why the Troughton era introduced a lot of, different, monsters and creatures in some of the serials was because, like I've already mentioned before, Evil of the Daleks was originally going to be the last serial to feature the Daleks. And while the Cybermen were introduced, not too long before Evil of the Daleks, after Evil of the Daleks, the Cybermen continued to be pretty popular with audiences. And the producers of the show wanted to create a popular monster similar to the Daleks. And they've tried this several times with, the Yetis, the Ice Warriors, the Quarks from the Dominators, the Crotons from the Crotons. And a majority of them didn't, last very long, besides the Ice Warriors. I know the Ice Warriors appeared in, a few other serials after the Troughton era ended. And the Yetis and the Quarks and the Crotons, I don't think made any appearances after the Troughton era, so yeah, it was kind of a way to try to get, a marketable monster just like the Daleks, but, it didn't really work out so well, and they eventually did bring the Daleks back, during the Third Doctor era. So, I think, all in all, that's all I gotta say about the Patrick Troughton era of Doctor Who. Honestly, all the serials that I've seen have been pretty cool. Some of them even better than, a lot of the Hartnell serials. I mean, I like both Doctors, but, the Troughton era definitely had some more interesting episodes, in my opinion. But hey, if you've guys ever seen any of the Troughton episodes and the Hartnell episodes, which one of the two did you think was better, Hartnell or Troughton? Feel free to let me know in the comments down below. And yeah, like I said, there are some Troughton episodes and Hartnell episodes that I have not seen yet, or serials. I'm not 100% used to saying serial. But anyways, yeah, there are some serials from both eras that I have not, watched yet, so maybe in the future I will do reviews of some of those serials. But that's about it for this episode of It Came From England. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you liked this episode, feel free to give it a like. Hit subscribe if you want to see more episodes of It Came From England and just mediocre plush content in general. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. That is about it. This is Tyler from the Character Workshop, signing out. Next time, what does Thomas the Tank Engine, Family Guy jokes, and MS Paint have in common? You guys will find out, and in some extent, we'll take a little bit of a nostalgia trip, shall we?